Hi guys, it's Mark Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also Mark Zicree of Space Command. And I am today in my Optimist hat and my New York Museum of Natural History sweatshirt. And we're going to talk, well, first of all, we have a Kickstarter campaign coming, so keep an eye out for that. We're going to be raising the money to finish shooting Forgiveness, the fifth and sixth hours of Space Command. We have already shot the entire fifth hour, and we've shot 80% of the sixth hour. It's a 2-hour story, and you can help us finish shooting, and it is very, very, very exciting. So keep an eye out for that. But meantime, I want to talk about my book haul at the Antiquarian Book Fair that was just held here in Pasadena. Now, many of you know that I am a book collector, specifically science fiction, and I'm always on the lookout for like really cool books that are distinctive, unique, etc. Now, some people, when they collect books, they want them to be pristine. They don't want any book plates or signatures of the previous owner or any of that kind of stuff. But I'm the opposite. I very much like the feeling, the individual history of a book. And so for me, a signature of someone giving a Christmas present to someone in 1913, stuff like that. And of course, signed editions are wonderful because they are books that the author actually held in his or her hand and inscribed, and those are marvelous. So when I was a kid, there was no internet, there were no VCRs, none of that stuff. Telephones were attached to the wall, for God's sake, like they should be. And so there were basically 2 ways you could buy a book. Well, 3, let's say. You could order it in the mail, which I don't know people who did that. You could go to a bookstore that had new books, or you could go to a used bookstore. And these were wonderful spaces, magical spaces, that you'd find all sorts of books from all sorts of eras, in all sorts of conditions, and you could amass a collection for a few dollars. And my mom, being a wonderful mom, would drive me to certain areas where there were a number of used bookstores. For instance, there was Hollywood Boulevard and the intersecting street of Wilcox, where Bond Street Books was. And often these bookstores would cluster so that you could go to several at a time. That's harder and harder to find nowadays. But fortunately, there still are physical bookstores. And I love physical bookstores because you can wander the aisles. You can find things that you didn't know you were looking for, books that were that the algorithm didn't tell you should be interested in, but you yourself can be interested in. It's a much more random and delightful process of discovery. And used bookstores still exist, and they're augmented by their online versions, and that's great too. But also there's eBay, of course, now. So I'm regularly buying books from eBay. Many of these books behind me, the ones I didn't write myself, were from eBay and other sources, used bookstores. And but every now and then there's an antiquarian book fair, and that's where booksellers come from all over the world, primarily England and the United States, to sell rare and interesting books. So Elaine and I went for a couple days this past weekend, and we found amazing things. And also, you can also find things on eBay and have them verified at a book fair. So let's get into some of these recent cool acquisitions and how wonderful they are. Now this is The Exploration of Space by the wonderful Arthur C. Clarke, author of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and comes in the original dust jacket with very cool astronomical art. This book is from 1952, and it is signed, inscribed by Arthur C. Clarke. So it's with all good wishes, Arthur C. Clarke, for May 52. So it's before he wrote 2001, before he wrote Childhood's End or Rendezvous with Rama, before he was a millionaire, before all these wonderful things that happened to him. And so it's a wonderful book, and it's nonfiction. It basically talks about how we'll get to outer space. This is 1952, and it shows a Martian base. Look at that. Elon Musk. Look at that, Elon Musk. And others who want to go to Mars. There it is. Cool, cool. And it's a great book. So that's a prize, of course. So, okay. So I hit the book fair. And, a lot of the books are very expensive. I mean, you can go anywhere from hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars. Have I ever seen a book priced at $1 million? I probably have. but you know, frequently you'll pick up a book. It's like, well, how much is this? It's $48,000, so that's not coming home. but but if you look carefully, you can find things for as little as $10. So, for instance, here is a book. This is The Mind Spider by Fritz Leiber. Mind Spider and Other Stories. It's from the 50s, and it has a wonderful cover by Ed Emshwiller. So you can see how neat that is. Look at that. Wonderful, wonderful cover. And then it's an ace double, so you flip it over, and there's a novel by Fritz Leiber, The Big Time. And it won the Hugo Award, which was the top award in science fiction. But at that time, the Hugo Award was not well known. Nowadays, it would say Hugo Award winner on the cover. But instead, it simply says Best Science Fiction Novel of the Year. And then it says the World's SF Convention. So it won the Hugo, but it doesn't say Hugo on it. It just says that. This is another Ed Emshwiller cover. He would do both covers on an ace double. And so that was $10. So, you know, so I said to Elaine, don't worry, we'll find things that we can afford. There's treasure to be had. So, and there was. You look through, you find things, and I collect among many things. I collect Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, H.G. Wells, H. Rider Haggard, the author of She and King Solomon's Mines, a lot of Mark Twain, a lot of writers from the late 19th and early 20th century. So here's a book, not Sherlock Holmes, but it's by Arthur Conan Doyle. It's the Stark Munro Letters. Now, what makes this book so cool? Well, first of all, it was written in let's see what the date is, 1895, same year as H.G. Wells' The Time Machine came out, and it's got illustrations. If you can see, it's a mystery novel, not Sherlock Holmes, but still very cool, with very cool illustrations of the era. But the best thing of all is this little card that's glued to the front cover, the inside front cover, and it says it's a calling card. Basically, people would use calling cards when they went to visit other people, and when they were introducing themselves to others. And this calling card is printed Dr. A. Conan Doyle, and in his own hand, Conan Doyle has written, "The little poem I spoke of is one called, quote, with either hand, unquote." And then he amended the printed name by writing, "With Dr. A. Conan Doyle's kindest regards." So here, let me show you that. And so this book, over 100 years ago, 120 years ago, Arthur Conan Doyle held this copy of this book. It has what's called a book plate. People used to put book plates on books so that people would know where they came from. So if someone borrowed it, they would remember who they borrowed it from, etc. So this has the book plate of Carolyn and Melville Haskell, and it says their book. So very, 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 very cool. And so it's fun because it's not just Arthur Conan Doyle's signature, it's his calling card, which he amended in his own hand. Very, very wonderful. So then, let's see what else cool stuff we got. Okay, so this is really fun. Sometimes on eBay, there'll be a book listed, and you won't be sure if it's what you think it is. But sometimes you'll buy it just because you think, this is probably what I think it is. Now, this is the book I bought, this little unassuming book. It's The Time Machine. And what this actually is, I'll show you this. Here's the wonderful illustration of the time traveler encountering the Sphinx in the far distant future. Here's the cover, the title page, The Time Machine, H.G. Wells, Henry Holt and Company, 1895. Now, what this is the American first edition, second state of The Time Machine, but it wasn't listed as such. It was just listed as an old copy. So I got this for $100. And what's really fascinating about this, I did not have an American first of The Time Machine. This is probably the single most important book in science fiction. The Time Machine was the first time travel story to have a machine as the conveyance. It was the first science fiction novel written by H.G. Wells, and it started his career with a bang. It was a huge, huge success. And this, now when I turned 40, yes, I am older than 40, guys. When I turned 40, Elaine and I went to London, and I bought the British first edition of The Time Machine, a gorgeous book. It has the Sphinx on the cover. It's just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. There was a Wells expert named Eric Korn, a book dealer and a writer, who took us to his flat, and he had tons of books by H.G. Wells, and we spent a wonderful day with him talking about literature, and I bought this book as a present to myself when I turned 40. But I'd never had the American first, and I very much wanted it. Now, originally, the first edition of The Time Machine, the American edition, got his name wrong on the title page. It said by H.S. Wells. Now the reason was, I think, because H.G. Wells had terrible handwriting, and they probably couldn't read his handwriting, and they thought it was an S. But this is the edition that they corrected to H.G. Wells. Okay, and so this is that's why it's first edition, second state. And it was published by Henry Holt and Company. It's in very nice condition, as you can see. It's not torn, not cracked. And here's the most singular and interesting thing about this edition. And I'll read you what we all know, if we've read this book, is the opening paragraph. Okay, here's the opening paragraph. The Time Machine, Chapter 1, Introduction. The time traveler, for so it will be convenient to speak of him, was expounding a recondite matter to us. His gray eyes shone and twinkled, and his usually pale face was flushed and animated. The fire burnt brightly, and the soft radiance of the incandescent lights in the lilies of silver caught the bubbles that flashed and passed in our glasses. Our chairs, being his patents, embraced and caressed us rather than submitted to be sat upon, and there was that luxurious after-dinner atmosphere when thought runs gracefully free of the trammels of precision, and he put it to us in this way, marking the points with a lean forefinger as we sat and lazily admired his earnestness over this new paradox as we thought it, and his fecundity. A great opening paragraph. So now this is the first edition, and in most first editions, almost all first editions, the first paragraph would be identical. Let's look at what this first paragraph is. Here we go. The Time Machine, Chapter 1, The Inventor. The man who made the time machine, the man I shall call the time traveler, was well known in scientific circles a few years since, and the fact of his disappearance is also well known. He was a mathematician of peculiar subtlety, and one of our most conspicuous investigators in molecular physics. He did not confine himself to abstract science. Several ingenious and one or two profitable patents were his. Very profitable they were, these last, as his handsome house at Richmond testified. Well, that's curious. Why is it a completely different paragraph? And the end of the book is different too. Here's the end of the British first. One of the great endings of all literature. At the risk of disappointing Richardson, I stayed on, waiting for the time traveler, waiting for the second, perhaps still stranger story, and the specimens and photographs he would bring with him. But I am beginning now to fear that I must wait a lifetime. The time traveler vanished 3 years ago, and as everybody knows now, he has never returned. Epilogue. One cannot choose but wonder, will he ever return? It may be that he swept back into the past and fell among the blood-drinking, hairy savages of the age of unpolished stone, into the abysses of the Cretaceous Sea, or among the grotesque saurians, the huge reptilian brutes of the Jurassic times. He may even now, if I may use the phrase, be wandering on some plesiosaurus-haunted oolitic coral reef, or beside the lonely saline seas of the Triassic Age. Or did he go forward into one of the nearer ages in which men are still men, but with the riddles of our own time answered and its wearisome problems solved? Into the manhood of the race, for I, for my own part, cannot think that these latter days of weak experiment, fragmentary theory, and mutual discord are indeed man's culminating time. I say, for my own part, he, I know, for the question had been discussed among us long before the time machine was made, thought but cheerlessly of the advancement of mankind, and saw in the growing pile of civilization only a foolish heaping that must inevitably fall back upon and destroy its makers in the end. If that is so, it remains for us to live as though it were not so. But to me the future is still black and blank, is a vast ignorance, lit at a few casual places by the memory of his story. And I have by me, for my comfort, 2 strange white flowers, shriveled now, and brown, and flat, and brittle, to witness that even when mind and strength had gone, gratitude and a mutual tenderness still lived on in the heart of man. Great ending line, great ending line. So, but here's the American first. How does it end? Quite differently. It ends with, at the risk of disappointing Richardson, I remained waiting for the time traveler, waiting for the second, perhaps still stranger story, and the specimens and photographs he would bring with him. But I am beginning to fear now that I must wait a lifetime for that. The time traveler vanished 3 years ago. Up to the present, he has not returned, and when he does return, he will find his home in the hands of strangers, and his little gathering of auditors broken up forever. Philby has exchanged poetry for playwriting, and is a rich man, as literary men go, and extremely unpopular. The medical man is dead, the journalist is in India, and the psychologist has succumbed to paralysis. Some of the other men I used to meet there have dropped as completely out of existence as if they too had traveled off upon some similar anachronisms, and so, ending in a kind of dead wall, the story of the time machine must remain for the present at least. So, 2 first editions, British and American, 2 different endings and beginnings, and probably there are textual differences throughout. So now you ask yourself, why is that? Same book. And until I ultimately came upon a different version of the Time Machine published in the 1950s in an American magazine, I had no idea there were 2 different versions that had been published. And so why was this? Well, here's the reason. Because this was published in 1895. There was no internet. There weren't even airplanes. And so to get a manuscript published, they wanted these books to be published at approximately the same time. So to make that happen, Wells had to send by boat a copy of the manuscript to America long in advance. And what he sent was an earlier draft of the book. So the British edition is the final edition of the book as Wells intended, and the American edition is a slightly different, though very similar, story that represents a slightly earlier draft of the book. And it's very interesting because in the ending, both the ending and the beginning are much more elegant in the British first, and this is it's very interesting to compare the two. Whereas in the American first, the ending focuses much more on the other characters in the story. At the beginning, the time traveler's friends, and talks about what happened to them. In this edition, the final edition, it's focused on the time traveler alone. So we never learn in the standard text what happened to Philby and all those other characters, but we don't need to. We want to know what the time traveler disappeared, but in his adventure with Weena, the Eloi, who he ultimately falls in love with and tries to save, that even though strength had dissipated in man and the Morlocks had become the other side of man, that Weena's affection for the time traveler showed that kindness still existed. Kindness and gratitude still existed in the heart of man. It's a great ending. So that isn't that a fascinating little literary story? And now this I got on eBay for $100 just a few days ago, and then I took it with me to the book show, and I went to Peter Harrington Books, a very well-known British book dealer who I've bought many books from, and they said, well, they weren't sure about it, so they pointed me out to another dealer, another British dealer, and he told me what this was, that this is indeed a first edition, second state, where the basically it was corrected from H.S. Wells to H.G. Wells, and it's in great condition, and it even has the owner's name written in it, the previous owner's name, Ida Warnock, and it says U of I, maybe University of Iowa, class of 1913. So isn't that just swell? So this book that I bought for $100 is worth thousands, and so I made a great killing as a collector of books. This is really fun. Just like when I bought my first hardcover edition of Fahrenheit 451 for $7, and that's a $3,000 book also. So that was really fun. And then finally I bought this. Now this is an early edition of the Princess of Mars, and it's not a first, but Elaine bought me a first edition of this iconic book. Several years ago, and it's one of my prized possessions. Why did I buy then this book? Well, here's what book collectors look for and literary collectors prize. First of all, it's an original dust jacket, so it's with a great Frank Schoonover's artwork. Wonderful, exciting. And Wells had never written before. This is Princess of Mars was his first book, and it kind of combined several different kinds of books. So it sort of took the dashing adventure kind of story that people like Dumas and Robert Louis Stevenson were writing, and combined it with a story that had come out a little bit earlier called Gulliver of Mars, that was a trip to Mars, but not nearly as dashing. And in this book, he tells the story of a Confederate officer after the Civil War who finds himself transported to Mars and becomes sort of a barbarian adventurer. And it's called A Princess of Mars because he meets the wonderful Dejah Thoris and saves her. And if you've never seen the Disney film John Carter of Mars, it's really a pretty entertaining film. It really got badly marketed by Disney, but if you've never seen it, check it out. I think you'll have a really good time and be surprised by what a fun film it is. So the reason I bought this was that it was quite affordable because it's not in great condition, but it has an inscription by Edgar Rice Burroughs, the author of Tarzan, the author of the Mars books. Now Edgar Rice Burroughs was a huge influence on my friend Ray Bradbury, who wrote the Martian Chronicles, one of my favorite books. And when he was a kid, Ray would read the Mars books of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and he would go out onto his front lawn at night and put his arms up to the skies and say, "Mars, take me home." And Mars in Edgar Rice Burroughs' books is called Barsoom. So the inscription, which is absolutely wonderful, is Barsoom Moon. This is the first story I wrote, published 12 years ago, or written 12 years ago this month, that I serialized. With best wishes, yours, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Tarzana Ranch, June 1923. So Burroughs wrote the book in 1912. It was published in serial form in a magazine, and then it was published in book form in 1917, and this edition is 1923, so 6 years later. And just phenomenal and wonderful. It has, it's dedicated to my son Jack. It says first published October 1917, copyrighted in Great Britain, because that assured the copyright much more solidly than an American copyright. It meant that it wouldn't be that he'd have some protection in Great Britain. And it has ads in the back, Zane Grey novels and all sorts of stuff. Really, really fun. I mean, it really is. And it says, announcement. On the reverse side of this dust wrapper will be found, arranged alphabetically by author, a list of the best books of fiction issued by all the prominent publishing houses in the United States during recent years. It contains practically all the best sellers and only books that have made good find their way into this list. Consequently, you are always sure of securing a worthwhile novel when you select from this catalog. These books are issued in popular priced editions similar to this volume and will be found for sale wherever books are sold. Grosset and Dunlap Publishers, New York. And the first edition of Princess of Mars was published by A.C. McClurg, which also published Tarzan. And but again, this is beautiful. It has many, many beautiful illustrations throughout, which I will show you. The frontispiece is the same cover illustration, but in black and white. But Frank Schoonover was one of the great illustrators. Here he is, great illustration of John Carter with one of the big Barsoomian natives, so that are really cool looking and very beautifully realized in here. And so it's just, wonderful book, classical book. So I bought these two wonderful works of science fiction and many other cool things, and it was a great time had by all. But the fun part is that the fun part about getting a first edition is this is the book that came out when it was written by the author, that the first people who ever read the book read it then, that someone went into a bookstore, bought this book in England, in London, and loved it and kept it and cherished it. And with this book, Edgar Rice Burroughs held this book in his hands and decided to write on the book the history of it, the fact that he wrote it 12 years earlier, and it was serialized, and how much it means to him. So and by the time he wrote this, he was successful. He'd bought the land that he named Tarzana after Tarzan, and the city of Tarzana is still there, though Burroughs no longer owns all of it. And but it's just really, really great to be able to collect books and have such a connection to the writers and to the initial audiences, and to be able to look into the progression of the text from the American to the British. Now that would never happen because now you can just email the manuscript, so they would be identical, the British and the American, with some exceptions. Clockwork Orange famously has an extra last chapter in the British edition, that in which Alex grows up and gives up a life of crime and settles down with a family. So it's interesting, but that's for entirely different reasons. But so there you have it. A journey into science fiction bookland. If you've never been to an antiquarian book show, look up when the next one in your town is and check it out. You'll find it very fun and very interesting. So that's about it for now. Again, we're going to have a Kickstarter campaign. We're rolling camera at the end of this month to finish Forgiveness, Space Command Forgiveness. If you want to buy shares, please contact me at markzickery@gmail.com. They're $7,500, and you get to come on the set and be part of our world and have all sorts of fun things. I take our investors to lunch. I treat them to things like Comic-Con and so forth. So it's really a cool thing. And but meantime, you can support Mr. Sci-Fi via Patreon. We have many cool things coming up, including a film that I starred in that was an adaptation of a Ray Bradbury story when I was 16 and wore my spacesuit. So we will talk about that in the next Mr. Sci-Fi. But until then, stay safe, stay well. Thank you for being part of this wonderful universe, and thank you for sharing and liking and doing all the things you can do with the Mr. Sci-Fi channel. We're almost to 100,000 subscribers. Tell your friends. It'd be lovely to hit that in the next few weeks, and they'll send me a little prize, and I'll put it back there. And this is really an exciting time. So thanks very much, guys, and we'll talk very soon. Bye.